Welcome to the Stories Told podcast. This is episode 106. Can't Keep a Good Robot Down. This is the Stories Told podcast. Two authors talking about stories in movies, TV, and of course, books.
I'm Michael Grayford. I write action-adventure stories in fantasy and sci-fi worlds, sometimes for younger readers and sometimes for adults. And I try to always inject at least a little bit of humor.
And I am author E.W. Barnes, and I write action-adventure, time travel novels, and space opera science fiction. Thousands of years, thousands of worlds. But be forewarned, beyond here, there will be spoilers. Are you ready for the adventure? Let's begin. Welcome back to the Stories Told podcast. I'm author E.W. Barnes, and with me is author Michael Grayford. And today we're talking about the story told in the novel All Systems Red, Book 1 of the Murderbot Diaries by Martha Wells. How you doing today, Mike?
I'm doing just fine. How are you?
I'm doing good, thank you. And what's new in your writing world?
In my writing world, I have pretty much finished formatting for Zara 2 for doing the interior and exterior formatting, which took a lot longer than I expected, because all these things seem to do. Still learning the process, so have to go through it every time. I have a different image for the top of each chapter. Not a different image, but
nice.
It depends on who's speaking, the point of view. So I have a different image based on the POV. So I have to go through, for every chapter, I have to set that. It's just time-consuming stuff. It's not particularly difficult. And the app that I was using was a little slow, so it took longer than expected. But that's all done. I've got the front matter done, back matter done. The exterior of the book is mostly formatted. I got the barcode and all that stuff. So it's pretty close to being ready to go. So that's where I'm at. Yeah.
What app are you using for formatting?
I have been using Atticus.
I use Atticus too. I find Atticus is slow when my internet connection is slow.
Yeah, I think my internet connection was good. I switched back to their limited version, they call it.
Yeah.
And about halfway through the process, I'm like, this is going really slow. And that made it a lot faster. So once I did that, I'm like, okay, that's better.
Yeah. And that's nice that they have a version for, heavy duty users of the app, and then a version for people who are not quite, because I think the heavy duty users, they're that's for folks collaborating on books.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then something that's a little bit less option heavy for those of us just writing one book at a time. Yeah. Do you have an idea of when this book will be released?
I haven't really planned it out. I've been telling my friends it's kind of when it's done, but probably within the next couple of weeks, I would think.
Yay, that's exciting. Okay, so are you going to have a sale of your first book, sort of to celebrate the publication of the second book?
That's a good question. I haven't thought about the marketing aspect of it because I've been just focused on getting this done, and then my next thought was getting the next two books done. Probably, yeah. I'll definitely be doing some sales. Probably, yeah, like you said, probably when I release it, and then maybe a few months later.
Okay, and we'll be sure to tell our folks here, our listeners here on the podcast, when that's coming up, so they can take advantage. And of course, for those listening, signing up for Mike's newsletter will put you in the position of being first to know when he puts books on sale and when he's going to be releasing the second book in his Tales of Zara series. Awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
And I'm moving forward on the Adventures of the Empyrean Guard. I was out of town last week and didn't get as much done as I thought I was going to. You think, I'm going to be in a hotel room for a few hours. I'll just write. And it just never works out the way you think it's going to work out.
Yeah.
Got less done than I anticipated, but still moving forward.
Great. That's good.
So what interesting stories have you come across lately in books, movies, or television?
Same things I've been watching. I've still been watching Superstore, that comedy show. Still watching that, and Severance season 2, and that's about it. Just working my way through those. Nothing new and exciting.
Still reading The Lord of the Rings.
Excellent.
Still watching the Doctor Who. Now I'm on 11, so I've been watching the 11 series with
Wow.
the pawns. And obviously read All Systems Red for our podcast today. And we're going to be talking about season 1 of Severance in our next podcast. So I've started watching that as well. What an interesting show. We are going to have some things to talk about.
Yes, very different.
Yeah. But in the meantime, are you ready to talk about All Systems Red?
Yes, I am.
Today we're talking about the story told in the novel All Systems Red, Book 1 of the Murderbot Diaries by Martha Wells, and I will read the blurb on the back of the book. In a corporate-dominated spacefaring future, planetary missions must be approved and supplied by the company. Exploratory teams are accompanied by company-supplied security androids for their own safety. But in a society where contracts are awarded to the lowest bidder, safety isn't a primary concern. On a distant planet, a team of scientists are conducting surface tests, shadowed by their company-supplied droid, a self-aware sec unit that has hacked its own governor module and refers to itself, though never out loud, as Murderbot. Scornful of humans, all it really wants is to be left alone long enough to figure out who it is. But when a neighboring mission goes dark, it's up to the scientists and their Murderbot to get to the truth. Did you enjoy this story?
I know a lot of people love this story, or maybe the series as a whole. This is only one of these I've read, the first one. And I was kind of neutral on it. I think there's some good fun things, and I think there are things that could be improved. Overall, I thought it was fine, but it didn't blow me away in any sense. Part of that may be because I listened to it on the audiobook, and it was read kind of flatly, almost as if it was an AI. So maybe that was intentional because of, it's a bot, but it didn't work for me. I would have preferred more emotion to the reading to accentuate lines and pump up the humor. Coming off of listening to the Skyward series by Brandon Sanderson, which was such an excellent audiobook series, it felt a little bit of a letdown hearing someone just basically read the story without really giving much into it. So that could be part of the reason it didn't land as well for me. As far as the story, there's a lot of fun things. I thought the idea was very good. The idea of a Murderbot. I love that he refers to himself as Murderbot. That's funny. And the thought that this bot gains its independence. And what is this thing going to do? This thing that refers to itself as a Murderbot. It's a great idea, great setup. I love that at least some of the humans very quickly related to it, the bot, as a person. Because I think that's kind of where we're headed with AI. If we get general artificial intelligence, we're going to be confronted with that, right? How do we perceive that thing? Some people will always perceive it as a machine, and other people will be like, well, this is an independent entity that should be treated like a person. So I like that she had those concepts in there. And I love that the Murderbot was concerned for my humans, as he refers to them. I thought that was really funny and touching for him as a character. But at the same time, he doesn't really want to have to actually interact with people, which I thought was great and very relatable. You can certainly understand that, especially from his perspective, or its perspective, I guess. I say his because it was a male audiobook reader, but it's a genderless bot, obviously. Yeah, and I love that the Murderbot was obsessed with human-created shows. It's kind of like, I'd rather just watch the shows all the time rather than deal with any of this nonsense. I thought that was fun. I think there's a lot of fun things to it. I think there's a good setup. So maybe the series as a whole expands more and would get me more into it and get me to have more of a positive feeling about the series. But for this one, I was fairly neutral on it. What about you? What did you think overall, and what did you particularly like about this story?
Okay, so I did want to comment on the audiobook, because I read the paperback, and so I did not have the audiobook deciding for me how to interpret the Murderbot, and I actually interpreted this character as female.
Yeah, that's good. I think that probably makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that's actually an interesting revelation for us that, it's likely an it, a non-gendered clone, I think they said that it was. But there was one line in the story where after the Murderbot was injured, they had taken off the upper portion of the armor and whatever protective coverings, and that it angered the murder bot to be exposed in that way. And that made me feel like it was female. And I don't actually think it was female. It just then, because of that, made sense to me to interpret it through the lens of a female, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, it does.
Which is really interesting because I then started actually paying very close attention for the rest of the book to see if there were any gender identifiers, and there are not. This is a non-gendered character, which I think is actually quite cool.
Yeah,
and
makes sense.
So it's interesting that, when you start saying he, and I started laughing to myself thinking, well, I was thinking she.
Yeah. Well, plus it's written by a woman, right?
Yeah, I think really interesting. And I think that's an actually very fascinating element of this story. We don't see that very often.
Yeah.
That you have sort of a, not even like when we were reading about I am Legion, I am Bob, that was clearly a male character turned into, so there was that male perspective. And so this is, you don't actually see very often a sort of a non-gendered voice as the main character. And I think that's really fascinating.
And if this had been read by a woman, I would have just assumed it was like I wouldn't have assumed, but I would have thought of it as a female robot in my head.
Yeah. Isn't that fascinating? Yeah. And maybe down the road when, AI voices might be able to create something that is very gender neutral as the audio for this. That would be very interesting. So anyway, as far as the story is concerned, I actually think it's a very solid story. You have a very relatable main character who has a clear character arc, and you've got supporting characters who are all well developed and very recognizable. You can tell them apart. They all have their own personalities. They all have their characteristics. You have a mystery that is very well breadcrumbed. What's going on. And an idea. I remember reading something a long time ago that said that a good mystery leaves breadcrumbs and allows the reader to draw the conclusions before the characters. So the reader is slightly ahead of the characters.
Yeah.
I was kind of drawing conclusions ahead of the characters, but not so far ahead that it was boring, which is, I think, a skill to be able to do that. And then it has a very satisfying resolution. We solve the mystery, we beat the bad guys, and there is a reward for the murder bot for all the things that this character went through and the arc that it completed. So I think from that standpoint, it's a very solid story. Does it stand out for me amongst other stories? Not particularly. I would give it probably a 7. As far as, on a scale of 1 to 10, it's a good, solid story, enjoyable read, easy read. This is like good beach reading. Just hanging out on a beach, listening to the waves, enjoying the story. And it actually is kind of like the entertainment that the murder bot consumed. Just sort of enjoyable serial entertainment to get lost in. I think it succeeds in that quite well. Is there anything we might have changed as a writer?
There's a number of things I would have changed. Obviously, I come at it from my own perspective of writing and what I'm looking for in a story. For me, I felt like this felt like a short story that was stretched to a novella, or
it's even longer than a novella,
or too short for a novel. It felt like I felt like I would have rather it had been a short story or fleshed out more to be a novel. And I think I would have leaned toward being a novel because I wanted more depth to it.
Yeah.
I wanted more depth to the supporting characters and even to the main character. So that's one thing I would have done. I probably would have given it more of a detailed story with more turns and more going on. I would also have amped up the humor more. I think the humor was a big factor in this story, but I wanted more of it. And again, part of this is probably from the way the story was read in the audiobook, but I wanted the robot to be a little bit more punched up. I think the bones are there for something really good, and maybe this gets picked up more after this first book. So yeah, I would increase the humor because I think that was one of the drawing factors. For me, the book felt a bit muted overall. I would have amped everything up: the humor, the tension, death and destruction. I would have had the murder bot be more witty, more sarcastic. I wanted it more pumped up. It felt like it was okay as a first draft. Like you said, it's like the story was all there, the plot beats were there, but I just wanted more from it. I wanted more tension, more everything. It didn't feel vibrant enough for me, so I would have tried to amp that stuff up. And it took me a bit to get into the story because I didn't have much reason to care for the protagonist, the POV character, the murder bot. He was kind of funny, it was kind of funny, But I would have tried to make Murderbot more sympathetic from the start. Because right now it's like we just get sort of his viewpoint, but I don't really get a sense of a specific goal for that character, something that really drives the motivations. I wanted to like have something to hang on to. What does this character want? Like deeply want? What does this character need? And how is this story going to take us there? I didn't feel like I was getting that, so it took a while for me to get into it. And the story felt more like a series of action sequences with no internal goal driving the story. So I would have wanted something more from that character. You mentioned the character position and character arc. I didn't really get what that character's progression was. I mean, there was a lot of stuff in the story, right? There's certainly more. It brings up questions, philosophical considerations, right, for the robot placed in this position, for the murder bot placed in this position. But I don't know. Coming off the Skyward series, this just felt so simple and superficial in terms of that aspect that it was just hard for me to grab onto. So I would have wanted a more clear character progression with a bigger payoff at the end. And again, maybe because this is the first of a larger series, maybe there's more to come that takes us there. But I wanted something a little bit more oomph in this first book. So those are the things that I would change. What about you? Do you have anything that you would improve?
I do have one thing. I also wanted to comment about the character arc. I interpret the character arc to be a desire for independence. And so then the Murderbot got that at the end. Started off by shutting off its governor module, which was a violation of essentially the rules. And then at the end, leaving its guardian, which was also a violation of the rules. So to me, this character was looking for independence and got it. And that's kind of how I interpreted it.
Yeah, no, I do too. And we'll get to that when we talk about the theme, what the message of the story was about. Yeah. But it's like there was no like yearning, right? There was no like passionate, I want to do this and I'm prevented from doing this and I've got to get there. He just seemed kind of like ambivalent about it.
The other thing I would change is this. I found the reasoning for the bloody murder spree that the bad guys went on to be really thin. There are some kinds of remnants, so we're going to kill everybody on this planet and leave bodies behind. I mean, it just didn't make sense to me. It whatever there was that was there did not seem to merit the extreme violence that went into trying to get it.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And so I struggled with that. I think I would have liked to have had some more explanation of why this goal was so important that it merited killing a whole bunch of people and framing the company for it. I mean, it seemed thin, and I would have liked to have seen a little bit more there to kind of just beef that up a bit.
Yeah, that's another one of the reasons why I kind of longed for more depth and thought this could be fleshed out more into a novel than what it was.
So tell me about the themes. What themes did you identify?
The theme that I got was what you had mentioned, which putting it into my sentence form, any sentient, sapient being will always long to be free. And that's I
like that.
That's kind of where, like you said, that's kind of where he goes at the end, or where it goes at the end.
Another theme that I actually identified in addition to that was the value of compassion for all sentient beings that we saw in the science team.
Yeah.
It would not have been able to have been freed without the compassion and understanding and sort of just recognition of kindred feelings and kindred experience that the science team did for the Murderbot. So those two things to me were interconnected and hand in hand.
Yeah, I love that. I wish that had been fleshed out more. We had seen more of that, more deliberation, more philosophical consideration put into that. I mean, this story and probably this series is probably more quick actiony type thing. So maybe the writer doesn't want to go into that in too much detail, but I kind of wanted that. Given that this is a science fiction story, I kind of wanted more of that. But it was definitely there.
So as a writer, what do you take away from All Systems Red?
For me, like this wasn't a short story, but it kind of had like the plot and depth of one. So if you're doing a longer form, for me, it's remember to have that depth. That's the biggest. That's my biggest takeaway. I felt myself wanting more depth to this. That's my takeaway.
Okay, well, that's a very good one. And for me, my takeaway is Make sure that the bad guy's rationale makes sense. You need a bad guy in order to have conflict, in order to have forward momentum in your story, but there also needs to be logic behind what the bad guy's doing.
All right. I agree with that too.
Thank you for joining us as we talked about the story told in All Systems Red, Book 1 of the Murderbot Diaries by Martha Wells. A big thank you to our Patreon supporters and all our subscribers. We're so grateful for your support and your encouragement. The Stories Told podcast is available on multiple podcast platforms, and we thank you for liking and subscribing or following, depending on where you're listening. It may not be a big deal to you, but it means a lot to us. If you have a favorite book, movie, or TV series you'd like to suggest for the podcast, leave a comment on the YouTube channel, and that link is in the show notes. You can find Michael Grayford at michaelgrayford.com and sign up for his newsletter on his website, and E.W. Barnes at 1000years.com, and those links are in the show notes. Join us next time as we talk about the story told in the TV series Severance, Season 1. Thanks so much, Mike. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you.
And we'll see you next time on the Stories Told podcast.